My son turned 5 years old on a Saturday, and the yard was full of balloons and children, and people who had actually shown up for us over the years. I was standing near the cake table watching him run with his friends, feeling something I had never felt growing up: safe, chosen, enough. Then I looked up and saw a man standing at the edge of my gate, a man I had not spoken to in 22 years, a man who had looked me in the eye when I was 15 years old and told me I was not his financial responsibility anymore. He was smiling like he had just stepped out for a long errand, like nothing had ever happened, like I owed him a welcome. I want to ask you something before we go any further. If someone left you during the hardest years of your life, missed every single thing that mattered, and then appeared the moment you had something worth showing up for, what would you do? Would you open the gate? Would you let them in for the child's sake? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace one more time? Think about that while I tell you everything that happened, because the answer I chose that day took me 22 years to earn the right to give. My name is Patricia. I am 37 years old. I own a small event planning business that I built from nothing. I have a husband named Darren who has never once made me feel like a burden, and I have a son named Marcus who laughs so hard sometimes that he falls over sideways. My life, the one I have right now, is something I created entirely without the man who was supposed to help me learn how the world worked. His name is Gerald. He is my father, or at least that is what his name on my birth certificate says. Biologically, yes. In every way that counts, no. I need to tell you this story completely, because the day at Marcus's birthday party was not a single event. It was the final scene of something that started when I was a child who did not yet understand that some parents see their children as optional. If I only tell you about that Saturday at the gate, you will not understand why my hands were shaking, why Darren came and stood beside me without me having to say a word, or why I did not feel guilty about what happened next. So let me start at the place where everything really began to break open. Let me start at 15. My parents separated when I was 9. That part, the separation itself, I actually handled. Children are more flexible than adults give them credit for. What I could not handle, what none of us were prepared for, was the slow and deliberate way my father chose to exit not just the marriage but the family. He did not disappear overnight. That would have been cleaner in some ways. He disappeared in stages, like someone slowly turning down the volume until you realize the music has been gone for 20 minutes and you only just notice the silence. At first, he came on weekends, then every other weekend. Then one weekend a month, which became once every 6 weeks, which became a phone call, which became a voicemail, which became a text on my birthday that said, "Happy birthday, kiddo, keep your head up." I was 12 when the texts started replacing the visits. I was 13 when even the texts became irregular. I was 14 when I stopped expecting anything at all. My mother, Alina, worked 2 jobs during those years. She was a school cafeteria manager during the week and she cleaned offices on Friday and Saturday nights. She was always tired. She always smelled like cleaning products or cafeteria grease, and she always asked me how my day was before she sat down. She never once let me see how close to the edge we were financially, though I figured it out anyway. Children figure things out. We see the disconnected notices on the kitchen counter. We notice when the brands in the refrigerator change. We know. I wanted to help. When I was 13, I started babysitting for neighbors on weekends to earn a little money. It was not a lot, but it felt important. It felt like I was doing something real in a life where so many things felt uncertain and out of my hands. My mother told me to save what I earned and not worry, but I used some of it to buy school supplies so she would not have to. Gerald knew none of this. Gerald, from what I could tell, had moved on to a version of his life that did not include the inconvenient weight of a daughter he had left behind. He had a new apartment on the other side of the city. He had a new girlfriend named Candace, who I met exactly twice. He had a social life and a gym membership and a truck he was proud of. I knew these things because my Aunt Rosemary, his older sister, still spoke to both sides of the family and occasionally let things slip. When I was 15, my mother was offered a chance to go back to school part-time to get a certification that would let her move into a better paying management role. It was a program through the city, heavily subsidized, but it still required her to be available 2 evenings a week. She sat me down and explained it carefully, the way she explained everything to me like I was a person who deserved the full picture. She said she needed my help holding things together those 2 evenings. She said she believed in both of us. I told her yes without hesitating. What she also did, because she was a leaner and she was always trying to do the right thing even when the right thing had never been returned to her, was contact Gerald and ask if he would contribute more consistently to help us get through that year. She was not asking for something outrageous. She was asking for what he was legally obligated to provide and had been underdelivering on for years. Gerald came to the house. I remember the day clearly because I had just gotten home from school and I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard the car pull up. I did not know he was coming. My mother had not told me. I think she did not want me to be disappointed if he said no. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them talk in the living room. My mother was calm. My mother was always calm in the way that people are calm when they are holding themselves together through sheer force of will. Gerald sat across from her with his arms crossed, and I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. I heard him say that he could not commit to more right now. I heard him say that she needed to figure it out. I heard him say something about his own expenses being real too. Then he looked up and saw me standing there. He stood up and walked toward me, and for 1 second I thought he was going to say something different, something that sounded like a father. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Patricia, you are a smart girl. You are going to be fine. You do not need me to make it happen." Then he left. My mother did not cry in front of me. She went into the kitchen and started washing the already clean dishes. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for a long time. I was 15 years old, and something shifted in me that afternoon that I could not name yet. I would not have the words for it until years later. What shifted was the understanding that some people are not going to show up for you no matter how much you need them, and waiting for them to change costs you years of your own life. I did not cry that day either. I think I was too stunned to cry. I think some part of me had still believed until that exact moment that he would eventually become the father I needed him to be. That belief ended quietly, without drama, in my childhood bedroom on a Tuesday afternoon. I want to be honest about the years that followed, because this is not a story where everything immediately got better once I let go of the hope. Things got harder before they got better. My mother finished her certification program and got the promotion she was working toward, but the 2 years in between were genuinely difficult. We had months where I knew she was calculating whether we could make it to the next paycheck. I kept babysitting. I got a part-time job at a bakery the summer I turned 16, which I loved more than I expected. The early morning hours, the smell of bread, the satisfaction of something coming out of the oven exactly right, those mornings taught me something about the quiet dignity of doing good work regardless of who is watching. Gerald called on my 16th birthday. He wished me happy birthday and asked how school was going. I said fine. He said he was proud of me. I did not say anything back to that because I did not know how to respond to pride from someone who had contributed nothing to what they were proud of. The call lasted 4 minutes. He said we should get dinner sometime. We never did. I graduated high school with good grades. My mother came to the ceremony with Aunt Rosemary and our neighbor Mrs. Caldwell, who had been like a surrogate grandmother to me for years. They all cried. I got a small scholarship and a partial grant and took out the minimum loans I could manage, and I enrolled in a business administration program at a community college first, then transferred to a 4-year school. I worked the entire time. I was not a perfect student, and I was not a miserable one. I was a determined one. Gerald sent a card when I graduated high school. It had a $20 bill inside and said, "So proud of you, keep reaching." I put the $20 toward my first semester textbooks. I did not send a thank you note. I did not hear from him much through college. There was a text here, a phone call there, always initiated by him, always brief, always ending with a vague statement about getting together that neither of us made any effort to arrange. I think he believed that maintaining the thinnest possible thread of contact meant he was still a present parent in some way. I think he told himself that story for years. After college, I got a job with a mid-sized event planning company. I was not running anything yet. I was the person who arrived early, carried things, confirmed vendors, fixed problems without being asked, and stayed late. I was good at it in the way that I had always been good at handling chaos quietly, which is something that happens when you spend your childhood learning to read a room and manage your own emotions so as not to add to someone else's burden. I met Darren at 26. He came to pick up his friend from an event I was managing, and he stayed to help fold chairs because he noticed I was behind. That is the kind of man Darren is. He does not wait to be asked. He just sees what needs doing and does it. We talked while we stacked chairs, and then we talked over coffee, and then we talked for 3 years before we got married in a small ceremony with people who actually knew us and had shown up for us consistently. Gerald was not at our wedding. I had not invited him. Darren knew the situation fully and respected whatever I decided. My mother walked me down the aisle, which felt right in a way that nothing else could have. She had been both parents for most of my life. She had earned that walk. I started my own event planning business 2 years after the wedding. I called it Gathered because that was what I believed events were about, not the flowers or the lighting or the perfect cake, but the act of people choosing to be in the same place for someone they loved. I built it slowly and carefully. My first year was small. My second year was better. By my third year, word of mouth had made Gathered a real business with real clients and real staff. Darren worked in civil engineering and made a stable income, but Gathered became something beyond supplemental income. It became a genuine part of what held our family together financially, and more than that, it was mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine before. I had built it with no inheritance, no startup money from family, no safety net beyond Darren's salary and the savings we had carefully accumulated. Every client, every referral, every 5-star review was something I had earned directly. Marcus was born in the middle of all of that building. He arrived in our lives the way good things sometimes do, a little earlier than planned, overwhelming, perfect. He was born on a Wednesday in February, and Darren sat beside me for 18 hours and never once made me feel alone. My mother drove 3 hours to be there. Aunt Rosemary sent flowers and called every day for a week. No word from Gerald. I was not surprised. By then I had stopped measuring Gerald's presence by what I expected from a father and started measuring it by what his actual track record had established. His actual track record said he would be absent for the important things, so he was. It was consistent at least. Marcus grew into the most delightful child I had ever known, and I am aware that every parent says that, but I will say it anyway because it is true for us. He was curious and loud and kind in the instinctive way that children are kind before the world teaches them otherwise. He had Darren's patience and my stubbornness and this laugh that sounded like it came from somewhere much bigger than his small chest. We planned his 5th birthday party the way I plan everything, carefully and with love. We rented a small bounce castle for the backyard. We ordered a cake with a dinosaur on top because Marcus had decided that dinosaurs were the most interesting thing in the world, and he was not wrong. We invited his friends from preschool and their parents, our neighbors, Darren's sister and her kids, my mother, Aunt Rosemary, Mrs. Caldwell, and a few of our close friends who had known Marcus since before he was born. The morning of the party was chaotic in the good way. Marcus was so excited he woke up at 5:30 and came padding into our room to announce that it was his birthday and could the cake come out now. Darren laughed and pulled him into bed between us, and we lay there for 20 minutes in the early morning, the three of us, while Marcus told us all the reasons dinosaurs were better than dragons. It was one of those ordinary perfect moments that I have tried to hold on to carefully because I know how quickly children grow out of them. By noon the yard was full, the bounce castle was operating, children were running in every direction, parents were gathered in small groups on the patio, my mother was helping Mrs. Caldwell with the food table, Darren was taking photos. Everything was exactly what I had wanted it to be, which was warm and real and full of people who had earned their place in our lives. That was when I looked up and saw Gerald at the gate. He was 61 years old and he looked like a version of the man I remembered, softer in the face, grayer at the temples, wearing a collared shirt like he was trying to look respectable for an occasion. He was holding a gift bag. He was smiling. He had no idea from the look on his face that showing up here unannounced was anything other than a pleasant surprise. I want to tell you what happened in my body in that moment because it was not what I would have predicted if you had asked me beforehand how I would react to seeing Gerald again after 22 years. I did not feel rage. I did not feel grief. What I felt was something colder and clearer than either of those things. I felt the complete and total absence of surprise. Some part of me, some part that had been tracking Gerald's patterns since I was 9 years old, had always known that he would reappear exactly when I had something worth showing up for. Not when I needed him, when I had something, when it was comfortable, when he could arrive at a celebration instead of a struggle. Darren appeared at my side. He had not seen Gerald before, but he had seen enough photos over the years to recognize him, and he had learned to read me well enough to know that something had shifted. He did not say anything. He just stood beside me, close enough that our arms were touching, and waited. Gerald caught my eye across the yard. He raised his hand in a small wave. He was still smiling. I walked to the gate. The gate was latched from inside, which meant I had to make a deliberate choice to open it or to stand at it without opening it. I stood at it. He said, "Patricia, look at you, you look wonderful." I said, "Gerald, how did you know about this party?" He shifted slightly. He said that Aunt Rosemary had mentioned it, that he had been in touch with her a few times recently, and that he thought it might be nice to come by and meet his grandson. I want to stop here and tell you something about Aunt Rosemary because she matters to this story in a complicated way. Aunt Rosemary was Gerald's older sister, but she had also been genuinely kind to my mother and me throughout my childhood. She was not cruel, she was not malicious. But she was also someone who had spent her entire life believing that families should find their way back together eventually, that blood mattered more than behavior, that the door should stay open. She had never fully understood, or perhaps never fully allowed herself to understand, the weight of what Gerald's absence had actually cost me. She had been the one who occasionally passed information between sides without thinking carefully about the implications. This was one of those times. I looked at Gerald through the gate and I thought about Marcus inside, running around with his friends, entirely unaware that a stranger was standing at the edge of his party claiming the right to come in and be called grandfather. Marcus had a grandfather. Darren's father, a man named Robert, had been present at Marcus's birth, had driven 6 hours to be there, had a framed photo of Marcus on his living room wall, and called every Sunday to talk to him on the phone. Robert was Marcus's grandfather. Gerald was a biological fact. I said, "Gerald, this is my son's birthday party. I did not invite you." He said he understood that, but he thought maybe this was a good time to start fresh. He said he knew he had not been there the way he should have been. He said time had a way of making you realize things. He said he just wanted to meet the boy. I noticed that he called Marcus the boy, not my grandson, not Marcus, the boy. I said this is not a good time and it is not the right way to do this. He said he had driven 40 minutes to get here. I said, "I know, I am sorry you did that, but I did not invite you and I am not going to open this gate today." He looked surprised. Not angry, not yet, but genuinely surprised, as if he had genuinely not considered the possibility that I would say no. That surprise told me everything I needed to know about how he had been framing this visit in his own mind. He had told himself a story where he showed up and I was grateful. He said, "Patricia, he is my grandson." I said, "He is my son, and you did not earn this moment." I unlatched the gate, but only to step through it so we were both on the outside, away from the party, away from Marcus. I pulled the gate closed behind me. I did not want this conversation happening anywhere near my child's celebration. We stood on the sidewalk outside my house. Gerald still had the gift bag. He set it down after a moment like he was not sure what to do with it. He said he understood I was angry. I told him I was not angry. That was the truth. Anger would have meant he still had the power to wound me in real time, and he did not. What I felt was closer to a very old, very settled sadness, and on top of it, something firm and clear that I had been building for years without knowing it was for this exact moment. He said he wanted to explain some things. He said there was a lot I did not know about why things went the way they did. He said it was not as simple as I probably thought it was. I said, Ald, I have thought about this for 22 years. I have had a lot of time to think. He started talking. He talked about the pressure he had been under when I was a teenager, about his own struggles, about Candace, and how that relationship had been complicated and had pulled him in directions he was not proud of, about how he had told himself he would reconnect when the time was right, and then time kept moving and the distance kept growing and he did not know how to cross it anymore. He talked about how he had followed my life from a distance, had heard through Rosemary that I had a business, that I had married, that I had a child, and that he was proud of what I had become. I listened to all of it. I let him say it. I did not interrupt, not because I agreed with any of it, but because I had learned a long time ago that letting someone finish does not mean you are accepting what they have said. It just means you are allowing the full picture to be visible before you respond to it. When he stopped, I said, "I hear you. I believe some of what you're saying is true. I believe you did have struggles. I believe things were complicated. I also remember being 15 years old and watching you walk out of our house after telling me I was not your financial responsibility. I remember spending years wondering what I had done to make a parent decide their child was optional. I spent real time, Gerald, years of real time, carrying the weight of your absence and trying to figure out how to become a whole person without the piece of childhood that you took with you when you left." He looked like he wanted to say something. I kept going. I said, "I am not going to tell you that I hate you. I do not. I am not going to tell you that I never want to see you again because I honestly do not know what the future looks like. But I am going to tell you that you do not get to walk into my son's birthday party and pick up a grandfather relationship on a Saturday afternoon like the 22 years before this did not exist. That is not how this works. That is not something I am willing to give you today." He said, "I just want the chance to do better." I said, "Then contact me properly. Not through Aunt Rosemary, not by showing up uninvited. If you want a real conversation, find a way to reach me that respects that this is my home and my family and my decision. Today is not that day and this is not that conversation." He picked up the gift bag from the sidewalk. He looked at it for a moment like he was not sure whether to leave it or take it back. He handed it to me. He said he would be in touch. I said, "Okay." He walked to his truck. He drove away. I stood on the sidewalk outside my house until the sound of the engine faded, and then I stood there a little longer, not because I was sad, but because I wanted to make sure the moment had fully settled before I walked back through the gate to my son's birthday party. I went back inside. Darren was standing just inside the gate, and he put his arm around my shoulder without saying anything for a moment, and then he said, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah, I really am." Marcus came running over to tell me about something his friend had done in the bounce castle, and I crouched down and listened to the whole story with my full attention, and the party continued exactly as it should have. That night after Marcus was asleep and Darren and I were sitting in the kitchen with the quiet that comes after a house full of children has finally emptied, I told Darren all of it. I told him everything, not just the conversation at the gate but the whole history, more of it than I had ever laid out in one continuous telling even for him. He listened the way he always listens, which is completely. When I finished, he said, "How do you feel?" I said, "I feel like I finally said the thing I have been practicing in my head for 20 years, without knowing I was practicing it." He said, "Do you think he will actually reach out?" I said, "I do not know. I think he will try, and I will decide what to do with that when it comes." The next morning, I called Aunt Rosemary. This was a conversation I had been thinking about since the moment Gerald had told me she was the one who had given him the party information. Rosemary was 80 now and had never had any children of her own, which I think was part of why she held onto the idea of family unity so strongly. She had always been kind to me. That kindness was real. But kindness and wisdom are not the same thing, and what she had done had crossed a line. She answered on the second ring, which told me she was probably expecting my call. I said, Rosemary, I know you told Gerald about Marcus's party. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, Patricia, I thought it might help. I thought if he saw the little one it might open things up. I thought you would want that eventually. I said, Rosemary, I need you to understand something. I love you. You have been Ni of the real constants in my life, and I am grateful for that. But my relationship with Gerald is mine to decide. Not yours. You do not get to make decisions about who enters my home or my child's life because you believe families should come together. That is your belief and I respect it, but it does not override my right to decide who I let in. Gerald did not ask me, he showed up. And now Marcus is old enough to have noticed a stranger at his gate and asked Darren who that man was. What am I supposed to tell my 5-year-old? Rosemary got quiet in a different way then, a way that told me the weight of that question had actually landed. She said, I am sorry, Patricia, I did not think it through. I said, I know you did not. I need you to promise me that any information about my family, my home, my events, my life stays with you. If Gerald wants to contact me, he contacts me. You do not serve as the messenger anymore. She said, I promise, I am sorry. I believed her, I still do. Rosemary is not a bad person. She is just someone who had been carrying the hope that a broken thing could be fixed without fully accounting for how it broke or who it broke. 3 weeks after the birthday party, I received an email from Gerald, not a text, an email which told me that he had thought about what I said and was trying to approach this with the formality I had asked for. The email was long, several paragraphs. He talked about regret. He talked about the years he had lost. He talked about wanting to know Marcus, wanting to be a part of our lives in whatever capacity I would allow, wanting to repair what could be repaired between us. I read it twice. I waited 2 days before I responded. My response was careful. I had written it out by hand first in the notebook I keep in my home office before I typed it because this was not a message I wanted to rush or get wrong. I acknowledged that I had received his email. I acknowledged that it seemed genuine. I told him that any relationship between us, if we were going to try for one, was going to have to be built slowly and on terms that I set. I told him he would not be meeting Marcus until Darren and I had decided together that the right foundation had been built first. I told him that if he wanted to prove his intentions were real, the way to do that was through consistent, patient, respectful behavior over time, not a single afternoon at a gate or a long email. I told him one more thing, and I want you to hear this part carefully because it took me a long time to find the words for it. I wrote, what you did when I was 15 was not simply that you walked away. What you did was tell a child that she was not worth the effort of showing up for. I have spent 22 years building a life that proved otherwise. I know my worth now in a way that I might not have discovered as quickly if I had grown up with someone telling me I was valuable. The hard way taught me things the easy way never would have. I am not grateful for your absence, but I am not destroyed by it either. I am just a person who learned how to stand up on ground you left empty. That took real work. I need you to understand the weight of what you are asking to be let back into. I sent the email, then I closed my laptop and went to play dinosaurs with Marcus in the living room. In the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about what I actually wanted. That is a question I had not fully allowed myself to ask in the past because for so many years the question had felt irrelevant. What I wanted was a father who showed up. That was not available, so wanting it served no purpose except pain. I had slowly, across decades, trained myself to stop asking the question. But now the question was live again, and I had to be honest with myself about the answer. Did I want a relationship with Gerald? The answer was complicated and real. Part of me, the part that was still 9 years old in some quiet corner of my heart, did want something, wanted to know he was capable of it, wanted some small version of being seen by the person who was supposed to have seen me from the beginning. That part was real and I was not ashamed of it. But there was a larger, clearer, more adult part of me that knew the following things. Gerald was 61 years old and he was reaching out now because something had shifted in him, and I did not know yet if that shift was genuine accountability or loneliness or something else. Marcus was 5 years old and deeply impressionable, and I was not going to introduce a man into my son's life without being certain that man had the capacity to be consistent. Consistency was the one thing Gerald had never demonstrated. It was the one thing I needed to see before anything else. So I gave it time. Gerald responded to my email within a day. He agreed to the terms I had set. He said he understood he had a long way to go. He asked if he could write to me occasionally, just letters or emails, nothing. That required me to respond on any particular timeline. He said he wanted me to be able to see, over time, that he was trying to be different. I said yes to that, one email at a time, no pressure on my end. He wrote every 2 to 3 weeks for several months. Some of the emails were better than others. Some of them still had traces of the old deflection, the way he would explain rather than simply acknowledge, the way he sometimes centered his own feelings more than he centered mine. I noticed all of it. I did not always respond. When I did respond, I was honest and direct in a way I had never been able to be with him before, because for the first time I was not waiting for his approval or hoping he would change. I was simply speaking clearly from a position of someone who had nothing left to lose with him and everything to protect without him. There was one email around month 4 of this correspondence that I have thought about many times since. He wrote about a box he had found in storage while moving apartments. The box had things in it from when I was a child: a school photo from second grade, a drawing I had made at some point of a house with a garden, a birthday card I had made for him when I was 7 with stickers on the front. He said he had sat with the box for a long time. He said he did not know what to do with it. He asked if I wanted any of it. I read that email while I was sitting in my car outside a client's venue, and I sat there for longer than I intended to. The image of those things in a box in storage did something to me that I had not expected. Not the things themselves, but the knowledge that he had kept them. That somewhere in the life he had built without us, there had been a box with my second grade photo in it. That the total absence had coexisted with a kept birthday card. That is the complicated truth about people who fail the ones they love. It is rarely pure indifference. More often, it is a failure of courage, a failure of consistency, a fear of the very discomfort that would have made a real relationship possible. Gerald had kept the card and failed the child who made it simultaneously. I wrote back and said yes, I would like the card, not the other things, just the card. He sent it in a padded envelope 3 days later. I opened it at the kitchen table while Marcus was at preschool. I looked at my 7-year-old handwriting, the stickers of little stars and cartoon animals, the words I had written in large, careful letters. For Daddy, happy birthday, I love you, Patricia. I put it in a drawer in my home office. I did not put it out where Marcus could see it and ask questions I was not ready to answer, but I kept it. That felt like the right amount of something. While all of this was slowly unfolding between Gerald and me, something else was happening at the same time that made the whole situation more complicated. Darren's family had started hearing the story, as families do, and Darren's mother, a well-meaning woman named Constance, had developed a strong opinion about what I should do. Constance was from a family background where forgiveness was the highest virtue and estrangement was close to a sin, and she had begun making comments at family dinners that made it clear she thought I was being too hard on Gerald. She never said it directly to me. She said it in that particular way that some people say things, sideways and with plausible deniability. She would say things like, every parent makes mistakes, or I just feel so bad for elderly people who have lost touch with their grandchildren. She would sigh when the topic came up and then say, I suppose it is not my place. Darren noticed. He handled it the way Darren handles everything uncomfortable with his family, which is directly and without drama. He sat down with Constance privately and told her that this was Patricia's decision and he supported it completely, that commenting on it was not helpful to anyone and that he needed her to stop. She did not take it well in the moment, but she stopped. I love Darren more for that than I can properly explain. The thing about rebuilding a relationship with someone who failed you badly is that it requires you to decide how much of yourself you are willing to risk on the chance that they have truly changed. There is no way to know with certainty before you begin. You are always gambling something. The question is what the stake is and whether you can afford to lose it. I was not gambling myself. I had done the work of recovering myself years ago. I was not gambling Marcus because I had clearly established that Gerald would not be in Marcus's life until I was ready to allow it. What I was gambling was my time and a small amount of my emotional energy, those I could afford, carefully. At month 7, I agreed to meet Gerald for coffee, not at my home, at a coffee shop close enough to where I worked that I could leave easily if I needed to. Darren knew where IW. As going, my mother knew where I was going. I had not discussed the full situation with my mother until fairly recently because Alina had her own complicated feelings about Gerald that were different from mine, and I had not wanted to layer her pain on top of my own processing. But when I told her I was considering a controlled, limited meeting, she listened to everything and then said, Patricia, you do not owe him anything. But if you want to know who he is today, that is a reasonable thing to want to know. Just take care of yourself in there. The coffee meeting was 1 hour. Gerald arrived before me and was waiting at a table near the window, which I noticed because it meant he had tried to be there first, had tried to demonstrate some small form of showing up early. He looked nervous. That surprised me. I had not expected him to be nervous. We talked for the full hour. It was not easy and it was not the warm reunion he had probably imagined when this whole thing began. I asked him direct questions. I asked what had actually changed in him. I asked why now. I asked if he had any understanding of the specific ways his absence had affected me as a child and as a teenager, not in general terms but specifically. He struggled with that last question the most. He kept reaching for broad statements. I kept redirecting him back to the specific. That struggle was informative. He was not a transformed person. I want to be clear about that. He was an older man who had arrived late at a partial reckoning with his own failures. He was not the father I had needed when I was 15. He was not even close to that version. But he was trying, in his limited and imperfect way, to do something that resembled accountability. That was worth seeing. I told him at the end of that hour that I would think about what the next step looked like. I told him I was not ready to bring Marcus into anything yet. I told him I appreciated that he had come and that he had tried to answer my questions honestly even when they were hard. I paid for my own coffee and I left. I drove to my mother's house and sat with her for 2 hours. We ate leftovers at her kitchen table and talked about everything and nothing, and at the end of it she put her hand over mine and said, I am proud of you, not for talking to him, for knowing exactly who you are when you walked into that room and who you are walking out. You never lost yourself in it, that is everything. She was right, that was everything. As spring turned into summer, Marcus turned 5.5 and started doing this thing where he asked questions constantly about every possible thing. One evening at the dinner table, he looked up from his plate and said, Mama, do you have a dad? Darren and I had talked about what we would say when this came. We had talked about it for years, honestly, knowing it was inevitable. I said, yes, I do. His name is Gerald. He and I were not close when I was growing up, but we are in a little bit of contact now. Marcus said, does he know about me? I said, yes, he knows you exist. He knows you love dinosaurs. Marcus said, does he like dinosaurs? I said I did not actually know, I could find out. Marcus said okay and went back to his dinner. Children have a particular gift for receiving information and then just continuing to live their lives, which is both relieving and quietly instructive. Later that night, I sent Gerald an email that said simply, Marcus is curious whether you like dinosaurs. A simple answer would be helpful. Gerald wrote back within the hour. He said that when he was young, his favorite dinosaur was the Triceratops because he liked that it had armor and still ran toward things instead of away. He said, please tell Marcus that Triceratops are underrated. I showed Marcus the response the next morning. Marcus was delighted. He said Gerald was right about the Triceratops and wrong about nothing. He went to preschool and told his teachers that his mom's dad liked Triceratops too. I sat in the kitchen after he left for school and I thought, okay, maybe one more step. Maybe just one more carefully measured step. I want to be honest about what I was still holding and what I had let go of because I do not want to give you the impression that this had become a simple story by this point. Some things I had genuinely released. The daily grief of his absence was gone. The desperate need for him to acknowledge what he had done was gone. The hope that he would become the father I needed back when I needed one was gone, and that release was actually peaceful rather than sad because hope that cannot come true is not hope. It is just wait. But other things were still with me. The specific memory of being 15 years old and watching him walk out of our living room was still vivid. The years my mother had worked her second job late into the night while he had a gym membership were still real facts that existed in my body. The cards I had not received, the calls that had not come, the way I had taught myself not to expect him so that the absence would stop hurting so much. Those things did not disappear because Gerald sent an email about Triceratops. They were still part of the story. They were still part of me. And that was okay. That was exactly what healing actually looks like, not the absence of the wound, the ability to carry it without being defined by it. Gerald asked in an email in late summer if he could take me to lunch, something a little longer than coffee, somewhere he could maybe share a few things he had been writing down that he wanted me to know. He said he had been working with a counselor, which surprised me and moved me slightly, because it told me he was making some form of effort that extended beyond our correspondence. I said yes to lunch. He brought 3 pages of handwritten notes. He said he had written them over several weeks with his counselor's help. He read from them. Some of it was still imperfect. Some of it was still more explanation than accountability. But buried inside the imperfect parts were moments of something real, a sentence where he said he knew that what he had done to a 15-year-old girl was not something he could justify with his own circumstances, that a child did not owe a parent the grace of understanding adult struggles, that I had been a child and he had been the adult and the responsibility had been his completely. He said it and he meant it. I could tell because he did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the table. I did not cry, I did not embrace him, but I said thank you for saying that exactly that way. That was the right thing to say. He looked up from the table. He said, can I ask you something? I said yes. He said, is there a version of this where I eventually meet Marcus? Not now, not until you are ready, but is there a version where that is possible? I thought about it for a long moment. Honestly thought about it with Marcus's voice in my head saying, does he like dinosaurs, and with the Triceratops email, and with the fact that Gerald had been consistent now for 8 months and had shown up to this lunch having done actual work with a counselor and having brought actual handwritten notes. I thought about Darren's steadiness and my mother's trust in my judgment, and the fact that I had earned the right to make this call without anyone else's pressure informing it. I said there may be, I am not closing that door, but you will have to earn it the way you did not earn anything when I was a child. One careful step at a time, no surprises, no showing up uninvited. And the moment you are inconsistent with Marcus in any way, I will end the access immediately, not as punishment, as protection for my child. He said he understood. He said he accepted those terms completely. We had lunch, we talked about other things after that, simpler things, things that had nothing to do with the weight of everything that had come before. He told me about his neighborhood, I told him a little about Gathered and a project I was proud of. It was the first conversation we had ever had that felt in any small way like two people talking who had chosen to be in the same room. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. Not from sadness, from the strange experience of something shifting that you had stopped expecting to shift. It was not resolution. It was not repair in any complete sense. It was a door that had been locked for 22 years, standing open just a few inches, letting in a small amount of light. I went inside. Marcus was at the kitchen table with Darren, working on a dinosaur puzzle. Darren looked up and asked with his eyes how it went. I gave him the same look back that said, complicated, real okay. Marcus said, Mama, this piece does not fit anywhere. I sat down beside him and studied the puzzle and found where the piece belonged. I said, right there, see, it fits right there when you turn it slightly. He tried it, it clicked into place, he grinned. I kept one more thing from that period that I want to tell you about, because it is the part of the story that I think about when I feel most settled about all of it. Several months into the careful and limited correspondence with Gerald, I was going through some old files in my home office and I found a folder I had not looked at in years. Inside it were things I had saved from my teenage years: a birthday card from Mrs. Caldwell, a program from my high school graduation, a note from my mother that she had put in my bag the first day of community college that said, "You're the best thing I ever did, go be everything." And tucked behind all of that, a piece of paper I had forgotten completely about. It was a list I had made when I was 17. Across the top I had written, in my teenage handwriting, things I am going to build for myself. The list said, my own nay, a business, a home, someone who actually shows up, a family that feels safe, to be the kind of mother I needed. I had crossed nothing off because I had forgotten the list existed, but standing in my home office at 37 years old, I realized I had built every single thing on it. Everyone, without his help, without his money, without his presence, without waiting for him to become who he should have been. I sat down at my desk and looked at that list for a long time. Then I took a pen and crossed off every item, one by one. That was when I cried, not from sadness, from the particular feeling of realizing that the most painful chapter of your life eventually becomes the foundation of the strongest version of yourself, and that nothing about that trade was fair and that you made it work anyway. Gerald is still in my life in a limited and monitored way. We have lunch once a month. He has met Marcus twice now at controlled, brief public meetings that Marcus has handled with the complete casual openness of a child who does not yet know the full weight of what he is meeting. Gerald was good with Marcus both times. Careful, patient, not trying too hard. I watched every minute of it. Darren was there both times, my mother knows. Aunt Rosemary has kept her promise and stayed out of it. I do not know what this becomes. I do not know if Gerald has enough time left to build anything real with either of us. I do not know if I will ever be fully free of the ache of the years he was not there. I do not know if Marcus will grow up to have opinions about all of it that I cannot predict or control. What I know is this: I am the one making the decisions now. Not fear, not guilt, not the old desperate hope that a parent would choose me, Patricia. A woman who was cut off at 15 by a man who called her not his financial responsibility, who spent 22 years building everything she needed without him, who stood at a gate on a Saturday afternoon while her son laughed inside with balloons and friends and people who had earned the right to be there, and made the choice that was right, not for the performance of forgiveness or the performance of bitterness, but for the actual reality of her actual life. I opened a door slightly, on my terms, in my time, with my conditions clearly stated. That is not weakness. That is what strength looks like when it has had 22 years to grow. My mother called me the Sunday after Gerald's first meeting with Marcus. She said, "So how do you feel about it all?" I said, "I feel like myself, Mom. I feel exactly like myself." She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "That is the best answer you could have given me. It is the best answer I have ever given anyone." And if you have been listening to this whole story, if you have stayed with me through the 15-year-old standing in the kitchen doorway, and the gate on the birthday afternoon, and the emails and the coffee, and the 3 pages of handwritten notes and the crossed-off list in the home office, then you already understand the thing I most want you to take away from all of it. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to set conditions that others find inconvenient. You are allowed to say not today even when someone really wants you to say yes. You are allowed to let someone back in through a door that is only open a few inches until they prove they deserve a wider opening. And you are allowed to cross off a list that a 17-year-old made in the middle of her hardest years, and cry about it not because it hurt, but because she made it happen anyway. Patricia made it happen anyway. If you have been sitting with this story, I want to ask you one honest question before you go. Have you ever had to decide whether to let someone back into your life who left during a time you actually needed them? Not a small drift, but a real leaving, the kind that shaped you in ways you are still discovering. What did you do with that door? Did you open it, close it, or hold it somewhere in between the way I did? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And I want to know if this story reached anyone who needed to hear that protecting yourself is not the same thing as being cold. It is the same thing as being exactly who you learn to be without anyone's permission.